Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Sundays. I'm very excited to have as my guest tonight Dr. Ronald Alexander. We meet here every month at Mystic Journey Bookstore, where we have influencers, thought leaders, and shapeshifters. And you will see with Dr. Alexander that he is all of that. Dr. Ronald Alexander is a licensed psychotherapist, leadership consultant, clinical trainer, and the author of Wise Mind, Open Mind. He is the executive director of the OpenMind Training Institute in Santa Monica, offering personal and professional training programs in mindfulness-based mind body therapies, transformational leadership, and meditation. His unique method combines ancient wisdom teachings with positive psychology and creative thinking into a comprehensive, integrated, behaviorally effective mind-body program. Dr. Alexander has been a leading pioneer in the fields of mindfulness-based mind-body therapies, Gestalt Therapy, Somatic Psychotherapy, Ericksonian Mind Body Therapies, leadership coaching, integrative and behavioral medicine since 1970. He is an extension faculty member of the UCLA Department of Humanities, Social Sciences, and Entertainment. He has also been a consultant and leadership coach working with the entertainment industry and corporations for over 30 years. Dr. Alexander conducts professional and personal training programs all over the world. Welcome, Ron. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Lovely to be here with you, Ora.
Yes. Can everybody hear us? Wonderful. So, Ron, I like to start Sacred Sundays with a mindfulness meditation. Ron, by the way, is my mindfulness mentor, and I can't tell you how wonderful he is in his guided meditations. So I would feel very honored if you could guide us in one tonight.
Okay. So if everybody would just sit comfortably, feet on the floor, and also experience finding the support from the chair, the base of your spine, getting comfortable there, feeling your feet connected to the ground, an experience of support from the ground, Mother Nature, experiencing the back of the chair supporting your back. And then take your eyes, and each and every person has a particular place where they like to focus their eyes, or you have a system of meditation that you already practice, which directs you as to where to focus your eyes. And I'll just review a couple of comfortable places. And of course, anyone in the room that has any kind of history with trauma or difficulty with closing their eyes, it's really important to open your eyes, and as you look around the room, find something that you can focus on that is comforting, that provides a sense of safety and easiness for the meditation. And then for those of us that enjoy the experience of closing our eyes, pay attention to a couple of different places that I'll just review. And the first place is try focusing your eyes at the tip of your nostrils with your eyes closed. And just bring the focus of your awareness at the tip of your nostrils. And just gently rest there. And then the second possible focus for meditation is to gently roll your eyes up and focus on the third eye, the space between the two eyebrows. And if you choose this object of concentration, let your tongue gently roll up to the roof of your palate and just rest there. And just bring your awareness to that place for resting and focusing your eyes. And then the last place will be at the very top of your head, and we call it the crown chakra. And so just imagine that you're rolling your eyes up and they're focusing and looking up through the hole in the top of your head, looking out into the cosmos, but simultaneously resting awareness at the crown chakra. So just take a couple of minutes and find where your eyes, where your essence and soul, or perhaps your unconscious mind would like to rest, and focus your eyes. You might even visit all 4 different stations of concentration, one slowly at a time, and then pick the one that stands out most, that would allow you to drop very deeply, very softly, very comfortably, to resting your attention, resting your consciousness at the point of eye fixation. And while you're doing that, also notice and pay attention that there's a natural rhythm of your breath. The breath is rising in the abdomen and is gently going up into the lungs. And when you have a full sense of breath, the lungs begin to soften and release. And as the breath starts to pass out, the abdomen relaxes and relaxes all the way in very softly into your spine. And this is called riding the rhythm and the wave of the mindful breath with the deep and heightenedly focused sense of awareness of just resting on one of these places of eye fixation. And it doesn't matter if your mind is active, or there's thoughts, or you hear sounds. And it really doesn't matter what kinds of feelings or sensations are occurring in your body. All we want to do is gently bring your awareness, moment by moment, back to the rhythm of the in-breath, which is a filling and a nurturing breath, and the rhythm like a wave. Consciousness is a wave, a series of waves. Following that wave on the out-breath. And very gently notice that there's oftentimes a space that organismically, naturally occurs in our nervous system, where there's a quieting down of the sympathetic nervous activity and a natural turning on of our parasympathetic nervous system, where we light up the neurons in our brain that say yes. It's very nurturing and nourishing to let go into this rhythm of the rising of the breath and the spacious falling away of the breath, with nothing to think about, nothing to do, simply paying attention to the natural rhythm, the natural nourishing in-breath, and the pleasant and comforting sensation of how we let go and how the nervous system begins to wind down into rest as the nervous system begins to rest. You may have already begun to notice the spaciousness that occurs between the thoughts. In the Buddha's teachings, in the middle discourses of mindfulness meditation, he says that when you arrive at the place where you can watch the thoughts in the mind like clouds passing in the blue sky, noticing, letting go peacefully and naturally dropping in to that spacious place with heightenedly focused attention and a comforting sense of resting in the heart space, resting in that place of oneness and openness. Utilizing the breath to feel the quality of loving kindness in our heart space. And radiating it out to each and every member of our current community here. Radiating out that spacious and loving awareness beyond this room to the entire planet, merging into that place of infinite, pure, pristine, unitive awareness. We are all one. We are all resting in that divine oneness. That everything that arises in creation arises from that oneness, that arises from the mystery of the unknown. In all form, all bodies will return to that oneness as we take our time to gently rest in the heart space. As we deepen into that boundless field of infinite love, infinite compassion, and infinite kindness for all. Then very slowly, wherever you are in the meditation, once again, just find the in-breath, find the wave of the out-breath. Bring the awareness back to where you originally began to focus the eyes. And when you're ready, begin to just feel your feet, move your toes, move your fingers, and gradually make your way transitioning back from that state of consciousness back to the here and now, taking your time. Slowly and gently coming back.
Thank you, Ron, for bringing us into the infinite. Did any of you go there? Did it feel timeless? Right. That's beautiful. Thank you. So, in your book, Ron, Wise Mind, Open Mind, it draws heavily on the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. Can you first explain what is that? What is mindfulness? And second, tell us why you believe that it is so useful, especially in times of crisis.
Okay. I'll start with a short vignette of how it was useful to me in my first time of crisis.
Great. I love the personal story.
I came from an Irish Catholic family in Boston, and I had no experience with the meditative or the yogic. And I had a very big family, 6 sisters and 3 brothers. And I was going to a university in Boston, freshman, sophomore year, and I transitioned to my junior year. And the first week I went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, I was laying in bed at night and I couldn't sleep. And my heart was palpitating and my hands were sweating. And I didn't even know what the word anxiety was. But I just knew whatever I was feeling wasn't good. So I said to my roommate, I think there's something wrong with me. And so he asked me to describe it, and then he said, I think you need to go to the infirmary and get some help. So I went to the infirmary, and there was a young student, and she said, well, we have 2 different pathways for you. We have this elderly psychiatrist who can give you a variety of drugs to help you sleep and to help you feel less anxious. Because she said, I think you're having an anxiety attack. And then she took a breath and she said, But then we have this fellow named Dr. Kent Poe, and he just had a Fulbright fellowship to India and Thailand and Nepal, and came back and he studied Buddhist meditation and yoga. And so we can either give you free drugs or we can give you meditation. So meditation versus medication. And so I was sitting there kind of scratching my head and going, wow, free drugs versus meditation. So I was probably one of the only people in the 60s that ever said no to free drugs at first call. So I began to start visiting with him, and he didn't have a desk or chairs. He had pillows on the floor, and there were pictures of the Buddha and mandalas. And we would talk, doing therapy for about 20 minutes. And then he said, and now we're going to do something that's called mindfulness meditation. And so we would sit on the floor and practice mindfulness, which I'll get into explaining for about 10 or 15 minutes. And in the very first few minutes, I felt like my anxiety coming down, and I felt my heart rate decreasing, and I noticed that my palms weren't sweating. And then for the last 20 minutes, he said, now we're going to do yoga asanas that he had learned in Rishikesh, India. And I was familiar, of course, because I was a musician and I played in a band in Boston, so I was familiar with the Beatles and the Moody Blues and sitars and different kinds of instrumentation. So he would put sitar music on, and we would do yoga asanas together, and he would do it with me. And then we would sit for the last 10 minutes together in total silence. And I would drop into this like very divine place of relaxation that was such a contrast from not being able to sleep, you know, and all the mind torture of thinking.
Yeah.
And so he gave me a prescription. He wrote it on a pad. He goes, you're to do this twice a day, and I want you to start out with 5 minutes, and I want you to build up to 45 minutes twice a day. And he said, I want you to come back in 2 weeks and report. And so I did, and I noticed after like the first 3 or 4 days, I was sleeping, I was resting, I was able to go to classes, and like it was as if I had walked through a new door.
Right.
And so I became incredibly thirsty for everything that I could read on the subject. And there were two in Amherst at the time. There were two programs. One was called the 5 College Program, where you could study at Amherst College, Smith College, which had the 2 top Buddhist studies departments. Robert Thurman was teaching at Amherst, and Tai Uno, who was a very, very sophisticated professor from Japan, he was teaching Zen. And then there was Mount Holyoke, and then Hampshire College, which was kind of like the real artsy, musical, creative types. And there was a guy there who was one of my first professors, Larry Domash, and he had just met the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so he taught this whole class on transcendental meditation. And then there was the University of Massachusetts. And so then there was a student across the hallway who said, and do you also know that there's something called a bachelor's degree in individual concentration, which is a mouthful. And I said, no, tell me about that. And he said, well, right now you're enrolled in business administration. Do you know you can take 3 majors and get a degree by creating your own unique combination? So I said, okay, how about psychology, Buddhist studies, in the physics of consciousness, because that's what Larry Domash was teaching with TM. It was called Transcendental Meditation and the Physics of Consciousness. Right. So for the next 2.5 years, that's what I immersed myself in. And then as I was studying with Robert Thurman and then Tai Uno Buddhist studies, minoring in that, I first came upon mindfulness. And I read everything that I read, and what I was most impressed about was that after the Buddha experienced his first awakening, and it's in this tiny remote village in the ancient old kingdom of Ayodhya in north middle India, and it's called Bodh Gaya. And there's the Mahabodhi temple that resides there, and the current Bodhi tree, and Bodhi means wisdom and knowledge, and we used to have a Bodhi tree here in West Hollywood,
Right.
but I think it's taken a new form. But the current Bodhi tree is a reincarnation of many, many different trees. It's the Mughals burned it down, and then somebody took the tree to Sri Lanka. And when the Buddha had his final awakening under this tree, he went to this deer park, which is where I went to, and it's in Sarnath, India. And what's fascinating about it is Buddhists from all over the world in December and January, like thousands of Buddhists from Bhutan, Nepal, Tibet, India, Sri Lanka, Laos, they come and they go at 4 o'clock in the morning, and everybody is sitting quietly doing their meditation Buddhist practice. And as the sun comes up, you look to the left and you look to the right, and there are hundreds and hundreds of deer that come naturally in, and they sit and they stand right next to you, because since the time of the Buddha, nobody has ever brought harm. And so they know that. So they come and they come to meditate with you.
Oh, beautiful.
And so
beautiful.
the very first discourse that the Buddha taught in the ancient language of Pali was the Satipatthana Sutra. You know, Sati means wisdom, and Patthana means focus, concentration. And it was a discourse on utilizing and linking attention that comes from the concentrational approach of meditation with the breath and with eye focus. And so that really, really grabbed me when I first heard that in Amherst. And then when I went to India, because I really wanted to experience it firsthand, sitting in that park and experiencing thousands of Buddhists all meditating as the sun comes up. And we did this every day for like 10 or 15 days. And then eventually the Dalai Lama arrives and he does 2 or 3 weeks of more advanced training. That I had this profound opening and awakening, and this feeling of like I had really come home.
That's beautiful. So you felt like you came home, and when you talked about your anxiety, and I know you do so much somatic work with people, your body guided you to what it needed. Your anxiety opened the door. And I think when most people feel the discomfort in their body, they want the quick fix.
Yes.
They want that to go away. And that really took you to this. And do you think that your anxiety was telling you something that you were perhaps living inauthentically? Because when you described that on this journey that your anxiety took you to,
Yeah.
you found your way back home again.
Yes. I grew up in a family where my father was an executive in AT&T, and at that time it was called the Ma Bell system. And he was a suit, and I was an Eagle Scout, and a choir boy, and an altar boy, and so like the perfect son. And so his vision of me was to also follow in his footsteps and make lots of money, and make deals and deal with people at a high level. And I think I started to have anxiety because I was in business administration, and I was first in my class in the University in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to Amherst, I think my soul was, through the anxiety, it was waking me up to look much more deeply through the symptoms.
Sure, yes.
That the soul was calling me for a whole other journey that I didn't even know about.
Yes, beautiful. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the body. It really tells us what we need to know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I have a saying where the body has its own wisdom.
Right.
And if we slow down to listen to it, it will reveal to us what we need. And now, in putting things in a holistic, or what we say in integrative medicine, the body also needs to embrace everything from medicine, surgery, So there's a place for medication because some people are born with brain chemistry like bipolar disorder
Sure.
or OCD,
Right.
where in the same way that if you're born with childhood diabetes or adult onset diabetes, if you didn't take medication, you would die.
Right.
And so there has to be a respect in how you listen to your body.
Right.
And so I began to listen to my body, and that my body, my soul was really speaking to me.
It was speaking to you, and you had that option. You've told me that story, meditation or medication,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So there is something even in that inner wisdom that knew that it was okay, that you didn't need the medication, or I think you would have opted
on
for
it.
that,
Yeah.
do you know? And you opted for meditation.
Yeah, and what was interesting is the young intern who did the intake interview, what she actually said was, why don't you close your eyes and take a few minutes to really feel into this? She didn't say think about it.
To feel into
I'll
it.
never forget it. She said to
Yeah.
feel into it.
Right.
And so when I closed my eyes, what I felt into was, oh, the meditation. And then I function somewhat intuitively on a couple of channels. Like I'm not psychic or anything like that. Like Dr. Judith Orloff is here, and she's a medical intuitive. She's over there. And I have a different kind of channel where I feel things,
Mm-hmm.
and then I hear auditory things or images. And so I was hearing at the time sitar music. And so I kind of went, okay, well, that's good. That's very calming. I should kind of listen to that. So I felt into that, and that said, okay, we won't go with medication. We'll go with the meditation approach.
So it sounds like you were receptive. You pretty quickly, wouldn't you say?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, there wasn't. I'm not hearing that there was much resistance, because people can have that resistance, especially into the unknown.
Yes.
And that you were allowing yourself to open to this whole new way of being, which was foreign. Do you know?
Yes.
And you said yes. You welcomed it.
Well, I always had the adventurer in me. So like when I was 12, I was asked, would you like to go see this group called the Rolling Stones at the Stoughton Armory? And it's only $2.50, and they're going to have 200 people. And I said, sure, let's go. And I remember being like 5 rows from Mick and Keith and the guys.
Yeah.
So I always had an adventurous spirit.
Right.
And so I wanted to experiment with going into the unknown,
Right.
which is the polar opposite. And in Buddhist psychology, we say we always want to shuttle between that of which is known and that of which is not known.
Right.
And where the fertile ground
Yes.
is always going into that of which is not known.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's where the core gold that I write about in my
Right.
book,
Yes.
we mine down
Yes.
into the real core gold of creativity, or the core gold of wisdom, or the core gold of intuition.
Right. Let's talk about that, Ron, because that was one of my questions to you today about the gold of creativity versus what you call the fool's gold, the difference between that. And for those that don't know what that is within themselves, what is that? What is the gold within?
Well, in the beginning, most people access what I call core creativity from a surface layer of imitative creativity.
And what is that?
That's, they'll listen to someone else's music and then they'll try to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
Or a clothing designer I once worked with until I did an intervention with her. She would go into stores all over LA and take notes of what other people's clothing lines were.
So that's why a lot of music sometimes is described as derivative.
Exactly. And
Right.
so what we want to do is we want to, through mindfulness, is we want to invite people to move from the imitative surface level of creativity, surface fool's gold, to drop into a place of that of which is unknown, that of which can be known, but that you have to slow down and listen, then slow down and hear what you're listening, and then at the deepest level of creativity, then feel with your whole body all of the molecules of the self, of where the creativity arises.
Mm-hmm.
And when I interview people, my first book, I had the unique opportunity on a personal level, not a professional level. I was invited to join U2's tour in 1993 in Dublin. And so about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call because his girlfriend at the time was a friend of one of my friends. And so we went to the show, and we were staying on the same floor, and I got a call at 3 in the morning. I was already asleep, that the lead guitarist, Edge, would like to come down and talk with me in an informal way about a dimension of consciousness that he quite didn't have his hands wrapped around, that ever since they finished the Joshua Tree album, which was a certain kind of soaring gospel way of singing and writing lyrics, that they went through this period for about 6 months where he was dreaming at night, and when he was meditating, because he does Ashtanga yoga, he was hearing all this new lyrics and melodies and sounds that the band had never made. And part of him was really excited about it, and the other part was like totally freaked out. Like, what is this? So
Freaked out in doubt, or freaked out that it was a lot of creative energy that was coming up for him?
Less about doubt, but more of like, there's so much coming up from somewhere I don't know where it comes from. And so that in that moment, in that pub at the Hilton Hotel in Dublin, I coined the phrase, I think you have spontaneously entered open mind. So thus comes the title of my book, Wise Mind, Open Mind.
Right, and that's a Buddhist term, isn't it?
Yeah, there's 3 terms.
Can you tell us about that?
Wise mind, which is when we apply mindfulness meditation, it takes us into wisdom consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's big mind, which is a Buddhist term for all intents and purposes. It's the cosmic mind. It's cosmic consciousness. It's what we call in Zen dropped off body mind, where if Ron's meditating and I drop into big mind, there's no Ron in his body meditating anymore. There's just molecules of consciousness meditating.
Would that be considered oneness?
Yes, oneness, numinosity.
Right, the luminous, numinous, oneness, allness, everythingness.
The pure, immersing oneself in the pure texture of divinity in its purest form.
And wouldn't you say that we can all experience that?
All of us can. It's
Yes.
not unique.
Right.
And then that's where it comes in. And then as we matriculate to wise mind, wisdom, then into the oneness, big mind, which also includes no mind. So when you transition into big mind, you give up the self. You give up the ego.
And do you think that the edge was part of the fear that comes up is that we start to disappear?
Yes.
The self, the persona, the I, the ego, whatever you want to call it. And it can be frightening.
That's right. And I think he was kind of frightened. And so I said, I think you're experiencing open mind consciousness. And so we're all sitting around drinking Guinness stouts at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And he goes, okay, I like that. Tell me more. And so I immediately closed my eyes and I went, well, it's the space where your music is coming from now, because it's something that no one in the band has ever downloaded. And I said, it's that same divine space of consciousness where Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin and all of the great philosophers and writers naturally download it whether they're using mindfulness meditation or any form of meditation or yogic practice. Or if you're Christian, you can pray. You can enter. In my early years, before I discovered Buddhism, I spent a lot of time in monasteries in Massachusetts studying the teachings of Thomas Merton. And
He was a mystic?
He was a mystic.
Was he a priest?
Yeah, he was a Trappist priest from the Gethsemane Monastery down in Kentucky. And I particularly liked to study him when I was 15, 16, 17, because I was in a band. And, you know, we were kind of raucous and rascals, and we liked to experiment with things. And someone gave me his book, The Wisdom of the Desert. And so I would take it when we would play around the state of Massachusetts and read it. And he talked about that he would go into the desert and he would get really quiet, and then he would download prayers, he would download the teachings from the Christ consciousness, and then he'd go on sad days to this local pub and drink beer in Kentucky and talk with people. So he had this wonderful blend between the mystical and the ordinary.
Oh, yes, that space between those two. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I will, but I just want to finish one more point on
Okay.
open mind. In open mind, so I said, well, when you guys were in Berlin, the entire, venturing into open mind, you invited the whole band in the morphogenetic field to entrain, because you were already there,
Oh, wow.
to enter and join with you.
What is that called again?
The morphogenetic field.
Did everybody get that? You're going to be tested on that after this.
and
Wow.
and there's another field that I often refer to that comes from, it's not mine, but I have adapted it to the understanding of open mind, which is the field of superpotentiality.
Okay, Ron. This is pretty yummy stuff.
Yeah, the
Okay.
field of superpotentiality. And so what I said to the edge is, I said, go back and get with the guys and bring in the morphogenetic field, the super field of potentiality, and just start playing one at a time all the new sounds that you're experiencing. And thus became the production of this incredible album called Achtung Baby.
Yes. Oh,
Now,
such
here-
a great album. Wow.
And here's the link to mindfulness and Buddhism. In German, Achtung means attention. And so in mindfulness,
Interesting.
attention,
Focus, awareness.
focused awareness.
Yes. Wow. Fantastic story.
Yeah.
So, Ron, you're going to read something from your book that you're going to share with us.
Yeah, a couple of quotes.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah. All right, so this is towards the end of the book, and it's from the section in the book, Trusting in the Unknown and the Unexpected, which we're probably going to talk about a little bit more about entering into creativity and open mind. And this is from the late Angeles Arian, and she was a co-teacher up at Ericksonian Institute in Big Sur for many, many years, and she taught shamanism, and she was able to take shamanism, and she was known as the corporate shamanism. She went down to Silicon Valley and worked for Google and Apple and brought in her shamanistic teachings, but made them applicable to the world of business and industry. So this is, in the sweet territory of silence, we touch the mystery. It's the place of reflection and contemplation. It's the place where we can connect with the deep knowing, to the deep wisdom way. And this is from Faust. And it's from chapter 12, Accepting the Turning of the Wheel. Trust your own innate knowing in the energy moving within you. Life speaks to you through your deepest longings and guides you with every step. As soon as you learn to trust yourself, you'll know how to live. Trust your own innate knowing in the energy moving within you. Life speaks to you through your deepest longings and guides you with every step. And as soon as you trust yourself, you'll know how to live. And then the last quote is from my old Zen friend who just recently transitioned off the planet, Leonard Cohen. And he was very, very kind and very generous. For just $75, he gave me this quote, whereas usually it costs a lot of money to get a quote from him. And the quote is, and it's from his song in his poem called "A Thousand Kisses Deep." It's a very, very long poem. And he says, "You lose your grip, and then you slip into the masterpiece. You lose your grip, and then you slip into the masterpiece."
That's nice. So losing your grip could seem as though you're really relinquishing control, right? You're letting go of holding on. You know, I know the other day we talked about this sort of closed fist, the constrictive way in which we hold back. So by really letting ourselves go, it's like losing our grip, right?
Yes, and there's a lot of qualities that cause us to become attached, especially to things or to our roles of like who we think we are. Fear causes us to hold on because we become very familiar with the land of the known, I call it. And anything outside of what we know in the daily schedule and how we, in ego, how we present to the world becomes very scary. And of course, why we want to use mindfulness to help us learn to let go and to be moved from constriction, and because the molecules of emotion and the molecules of the body and even the molecules of creativity and art, when we constrict them, there's no space for any newness. There's no space to see freshly the world with your eyes or to hear what you haven't heard before because you're all bounded up. And so the practices of mindfulness and, again, any forms of meditation or yogic practices. I just happen to be talking about mindfulness tonight because that's what the book is about. But the whole dimension, if we make a daily practice to start letting go in small ways, it's also a Lama I studied with, Sokni Rinpoche from Nepal. He says that as we start to practice letting go, we eventually prepare ourselves for the ultimate trip.
Right, yes.
And he says it's a trip, and he was funny. I said, I think what you're talking about is a fellow rocker from Venice when he was 17, Jim Morrison, wrote on the beach, "No one gets out of here alive." And he says, well, I never heard of him, but I think he's on the same level. He's got some wisdom in that, which is the ultimate trip, you know. And so we have to work with our control,
right,
so that the ultimate transition isn't something we become afraid of,
right,
but we actually welcome it.
Well, it's the incremental letting go. It's the moment by moment letting go. I mean, isn't that even being in present moment awareness, that you're letting go of being in any other moment other than now?
That's right. And what we want to do is come out of all the other moments of distraction that we endlessly go in to avoid fully coming into the moment and fully being here now, which is really mindfulness and meditation in action. And so it doesn't matter whether we're meditating on the meditation cushion. You know, that's good discipline, and it's parts of the frontiers of consciousness that we do need to learn. But washing the dishes, like this morning I was at the Earth Cafe with my friend Nina, and I was, she noticed I was drinking the coffee with my left hand. She says, why are you drinking the coffee with the left hand? And I said, because I'm letting go of control.
Oh, I love that. Why not? I'm left-handed, and I think it's great to switch out your hands.
Yeah,
do you know?
and it actually affects the neuronal tracking patterns.
Right. As a
in the
matter of fact, I
brain.
think we should be doing that as children.
Yeah, left, right.
Yeah.
We only learn as children that we're a righty or a lefty. But what if our parents said, you can be both.
Yes.
You can be
And schools, because I was forced, I didn't feel that my being left-handed was really welcomed, because all the desks were right-handed desks. So
Yeah.
I had to write very uncomfortably. So being told that, given the option that we have the right and left hemisphere, is something that we want to explore.
Yeah, and it allows us to let go of control and allows us to shift and actually create new neuronal patterns. For example, in meditation mind research, a researcher she was at the University of Massachusetts Mass General Hospital, Sarah Lazar, and now she is at Harvard, and she's doing a lot of brain scanning and CAT scanning on actually studying what 40 years we couldn't study of what meditation actually did and how it affected the brain and what regions and centers of the brain it lets up. And so one of her outcome research studies is that when we practice mindfulness meditation, we turn on both the mid-insula region of the brain. And what's great news about that is the old Western psychological approach was after about age 50, we're all destined to fade to black in heading towards dementia, poor memories. And what she came up with was that the mid-insula, if you practice brain complexity, whether it's something like luminosity or chest or mindfulness meditation or tennis or using your left hand instead of the right hand, is that you can light up the mid-insula and you can produce not hundreds or thousands of millions of new neurons, but billions each and every day. So every day you're entering into your own brain-mind consciousness gym. And so I coined a phrase and introduced it to Buddhism and also Western psychology, which was that as we practice mindfulness meditation and we apply it to brain plasticity in neuroscience, mind strength.
Right, absolutely, yes. Yeah. And it makes me think of, my book says we think, 40 to 70,000 thoughts a day. It's like, I like the idea of playing with your thoughts, doing sort of these wonderful mental, agile gymnastics in our minds where we can just create whatever we want.
Yeah, and what's wonderful about your book, says Who, is that you take people through a whole series of steps of what they can do to transform their thinking, which then transforms the neurons in their brain. And not only do you light up, in the Says Who method, the mid-insula, but you also help people to shift from the right prefrontal cortex, which is pessimistic, it's constricted, it has, when you're feeling depressed or moody, you're primarily concentrated in the right prefrontal cortex, and you can shift to the left prefrontal cortex, which is about possibility, it's about excitement, it's about creativity, it's about a boundlessness.
Right, which you call that, like creative soup, don't you have something?
I call it the creative soup.
Into the creative soup.
And I talk a lot about have your creative soup in your brain and in your consciousness constantly cooking on the back burner all day. Because you never know when you're going to put in a ladle and need to drink it.
I know, and that you can make it whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you using your left hand for your coffee, that's just a choice that you make. We make these choices.
Yeah.
We can make all of these choices to allow for that creativity, to allow for the thoughts to become whatever we want them to be and to change them and to enter into, what did you call that? You said to the edge, that wonderful space that he was in?
Of pure potentiality.
Pure potentiality.
And then the morphogenetic field.
Right.
Because you see, are you finished with the point?
Yes.
Yeah. Musicians are primarily taking molecules of energy, and they're not only creating them, but they're reorganizing them as they play. And then I'm working with a young singer right now, and she's a fabulous vocalist. She's a white girl who has like a vocal stack of a black girl. But she has a lot of awkward self-consciousness of dancing And so they have like all sorts of dances around her. And when I brought up the notion that if she would use visualization and that she could capture, when she first started dancing as a little girl, if she could capture that in imagery and move the self-consciousness from the right prefrontal cortex to the left, and then to visualize standing in front of a mirror in her bedroom hours before she has to go meet with the choreographer, and then letting, as she starts to rearrange the molecules in her physical body and see all the joy that she experienced as a child, then to let herself start dancing in the bedroom. So she came back last week and she said, wow, did I have an exciting, my choreographer said, did you go to a workshop? Like, what happened? And it was just from rearranging the neurons.
Right.
And I did very little. All I did is just set it up so that she could see that we can change our minds with awareness, with mindfulness. Then we change our brains. And as we change our brains, we change the production and the pathways of neuronal train tracking. And then as we change the brain, we change our consciousness. And it can all go in reverse, too. As we change our consciousness, when we're doing any kind of spiritual practice, it can affect change in the brain, and then it can affect change in the mind. In your book, your book covers a lot of that territory.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, what you were saying, though, speaking of thoughts, because my book is about changing your thoughts and creating whatever you want them to be. And if you hold a thought in your mind's eye, be it hearing the sound of music, and then you go on the piano and you play the very note that you heard inside your head, or holding a thought in your mind's eye and actualizing it outside of yourself, that's where all the dreams begin. They begin with, I believe it is that third eye, that eye of wisdom, that we hold that within ourselves. But when you describe this dancer, it sounds to me like she was dancing with feeling and not with thinking.
Yes.
Do you know? She went into, and it reminded me of when you described earlier about what you felt when you dropped into the meditation for the first time.
Yes.
And you felt the music.
Yeah.
And when we go into the feeling of the music, and the feeling, we let our senses be so alive and so awake, which mindfulness is so beautiful to assist us in that, so that all of our senses are completely alive and open, that we go into the experience, we go into feeling, and not letting our thoughts dictate what that feeling is.
Yes.
Do you know?
Very beautifully said, because when we come out of thinking, when we come out of the thinking mind, the opportunity to know, the opportunity to discover, the opportunity to learn, all becomes the possibility of open-minded consciousness. And even though all of that came to fruition for me in my 20s, I do have to give my lovely grandmom, who unfortunately, she was the love of my life, because when I sat in her lap,
So sweet.
she, in County Galway, she grew up very poor, and I visited the farm, the family farm, and they showed me this little basket, metal basket, and they said, that's where your grandma was born, in hot water. and then she came over on the boats because of the Irish famine, and she was like 13, and she had to clean houses in Boston with my grandfather. And she would sit me down at the piano, and this is a woman who never had a lesson in music her entire life, because she was too poor to. And she would sit at the piano in Boston, and she'd put me on her lap, and I would like really relax, and she'd say, Ronnie, just close your eyes and discover. And she'd play the piano extemporaneously.
So you were feeling it.
Oh yeah, feeling it.
Just
like
giving you permission to drop into complete feeling bliss.
yeah, and it was long before like I had to study any music in high school in Boston, and long before I joined the band. I was just in that state of pure receptivity from that open-minded awareness.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ron, can we talk a little bit about, you talk about the 3 steps of creating a mandala for your life. Can you explain what that is? And let's talk a little bit about the mandala, because I think that's a wonderful metaphor for how you create and then how you begin anew?
All right. When I was 21, I was part of a team combining the University of Massachusetts, Hampshire College, and Amherst College, and we had a distinguished visiting speaker program. And so we had a variety of some rascals. We had Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was teaching Tibetan Buddhism. And we asked him what he wanted before he talked, and he said, I want a fifth of sake. And then the next month we had Alan Watts. And what did he want? He wanted a fifth of gin. And unfortunately, these guys were, let's just say that they never discovered the program. And that's both of them why they had very short lives. Prolific teachers, but very short lives because they didn't deal with themselves. And then I was doing some research, and I heard about these two other noted guys. And in my later life, when I had the opportunity up at Esalen to run into Joseph Campbell, the joke between Joe and I was, Joe, I knew you before you were a Joseph Campbell. And he would say, that's right, Ron, you knew me before I was Joseph Campbell, because he'd been writing all of these books that George Lucas, like Hero with 1,000 Faces, all the Star Wars stuff was extracted from that. But he kept a very low profile. He was writing all these encyclopedias on mythology and symbolism. He was a very humble guy. And our connection, of course, we were both Irishmen. And so he'd always say on Saturday night up at Esalen, Ron, you have to come. We have to go up the street and get a beer. We're Irishmen, even though I didn't want to. But I invited him to Amherst College, and he brought mandalas from Tibet. And he described what a mandala was. And that this goes back to ancient times. And the mandalas were the way that the early Tibetans, they painted them, and they described birth, life, sickness, joy, happiness, pain, suffering, bliss, and then old age, and then the death process. And so that gave me the idea for, in my book, is to write about not all that stuff, but to take certain aspects of the mandalas and tell people we all need to create a mandala for our life. And the mandalas can involve future visions, future goals. They can involve the things that we want to work with to transmute and to transform and to transcend. And they're also very, very useful to meditate on.
Do you think that in a meditation, a mindfulness meditation, and you focus, and again, you return to your third eye center, that for me, when I do that, when I close my eyes, I can actually see a mandala. I can create a mandala right in that vision space of my third eye. And I think that we can do things like that in our meditations. We can visualize what that mandala looks like, and we create it to be whatever we want it to be.
Yes, and that's very similar to, I teach a saying, set your mind on what you want, and it will manifest. And I suggest to all of my clients and students to ask 4 questions every day. Why? Why not? Why not you? And why not now? And so
Great
why?
morning questions to ask.
To start the day, why?
Yes, definitely.
Why not? Because that really opens up the field of possibility. Why not you? And then why not now?
Right.
And I know you come, Ora, from a wonderful background of acting and screenwriting prior to this incarnation.
Right.
And so you have that in you. And sense memory training. And what were some of the teachers you've shared with me that you studied with?
The teachers that I studied with on my path?
Yeah, in the acting.
I studied with Peggy Fury.
Yeah, Peggy Fury.
Yeah, and Bill Trailer, who was her partner, and they were just, the top of their game acting teachers in the 80s.
Yeah, and a lot of those, the LA teachers, because they were exposed for all of what was going on in Santa Monica Santa Monica Canyon, Christopher Isherwood, who was a mystic and wrote a lot of books on yoga and meditation, he would invite guys like Alan Watts to come down, and they would have these salons. And so a lot of the acting teachers were invited and brought into that. And then they would introduce some of that. And the whole notion of closing your eyes in acting class gave birth to the whole guided visual imagery process.
Right, exactly. And being present.
And
I
being
mean,
present.
You have to be in present time to be able to create from that place and to be able to imbibe whatever character or persona you're depicting in present time. Do you know, and opening, speaking of the expansiveness and the non-constrictiveness, you are in complete expansiveness.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
to allow yourself to download, to allow yourself to have that creativity come through you in the form of embodying a character that you're perhaps playing.
Yes, and where creativity and getting to that deeper level of mining for the goal comes in is you have to let go of control, which we were talking about earlier. So first we have to manifest a self. And so there's a saying in Buddhism, first you have to become somebody before you can become nobody. And that's where Western psychology comes in. It's very easy to just simply say, I'm going to drop my ego, I'm going to drop myself, and what we've come to term in the last 10 years is there's a lot of spiritual bypassing that goes on.
Right.
Where people don't want to deal with feelings, they don't want to deal with relationships, and they just want to say that they're mystically enlightened.
Right, talk about that. That's a really important subject. I know you and I have discussed it about stages versus states of consciousness or awareness. Can you go into that a little bit? Because I think that's really important, especially based on what you just brought up, that there is that notion that you can access that higher state of consciousness without really embodying the necessary stages of consciousness raising.
Yeah, you can visit in transpersonal psychology. Ken Wilber, who's the most renowned theorist, has assembled a map, a cartography of states and then stages. And when Ram Dass, who was a professor at Harvard, Richard Alpert, and him and Timothy Leary were experimenting with psychedelic drugs, Ram Dass went to India. And Ram Dass went to India, closer or far away? Okay. and so he was trying to figure out, after years of utilizing drugs, to visit those mystical holy states, of how he could more developmentally, because he was a developmental psychologist, how he could get there and stay there. And so he went to visit Nim Crowley Baba, a great saint, and he gave him something like, thousands of milligrams of LSD. And he wrote...
Today, is that not called microdosing?
This was maxodosing? Maxodosing.
Okay, I think you've just coined a whole new term.
And so Maharaj, he was rolling around on his blanket, and they thought, oh my God, Ram Dass thought, maybe we've made him psychotic, or he's going to be schizophrenic. And so after a couple of hours, he sat up and he said, okay, it's a helpful tool to visit God, but you can't stay there. You have to come back. And wouldn't it be more useful, in addition to taking these, what they call journeys, to visit and to have openings, to learn some tools? We call them upayas, methods. Asanas, pranayama, meditation, tai chi, qigong, contemplation. These upayas that over time, in a developmental model, will help you step and stage by stage grow into awakened consciousness, so that you don't have to blast out and then come back down.
Right. Well, how long was Buddha under that tree?
Buddha was 39 years of traveling and studying.
Right. So I think we have to remember that this isn't just instantaneous. I mean, even though the high can be a wonderful place
Yeah.
to experience,
Sure.
staying there is a part of the journey of knowing that you can't always stay there.
Yes, and without any judgment, the
Right.
high is the high. But I personally have come to learn that the developmental pathway of discipline and step and stage by stage allows me and others to arrive and to stay. And then what we call in Buddhist psychology, we not only experience the first stage of enlightenment, which is an aha, or what's called stream entry, but then we start to experience the jhanas,
Right. The jhanas.
the jhanas, the wisdom stages.
Right.
And those wisdom stages require that you really have a practice.
So having that practice, having that discipline, because it's a discipline, and again, going
It is
back
a
to
discipline.
mind strength, it's the chop wood, carry water.
Chop
Do you
wood-
know, it is that practice.
Yeah, and I write in the book, you can't go to a gym and be completely out of shape and go in and lift 150 pounds and then in 3 days think you're in shape. So I use that metaphor that it takes you time, and that every time that we practice mindfulness, not only does it create these changes, and now we have scientific evidence
Right.
that the CAT scans and the brain scans show the matriculation of movement through brain plasticity. And
Right.
I won't take everyone's time and get into it in detail, but one of the outcome studies that Sarah Lazard did is she took a group of about 12 people, and most of them were college fraternity boys at MIT. And then she had about 6 senior lamas who had been practicing for about 30 years. And there was this notion of what was most important was not the amount of years that the lamas had been practicing with discipline. That was essential, and that almost all of them had some advanced level of awakening. But there was 2 of the fraternity frat boys who were in the study just to get the money, and that in a very short period of time, because they had such discipline and they focused their minds so well that they had almost the same level of awakening as the 30-year lamas. And so one of the outcome reports was, it's not so much that you spend 30 years sitting on a cushion high in the Himalayas, but it's how you use your attention and focus in during meditation.
Right. And also, Ron, wouldn't you say it's how you use your attention and your focus in the moment that you are in?
In the moment.
In all the moments, from moment to moment.
Washing
and
the dishes.
not just in meditation, which
Yeah.
we have a concentrated amount of time where we can access that sometimes more readily when we quiet the mind
Yes.
more, but that it's even off the pillow, off the mat, and it's in all the moments of our day.
Off the pillow, off the mat, and taking consciousness, taking mindfulness into action in each and everything that you're doing. Every encounter is an opportunity to be compassionate.
Right.
Every encounter is an opportunity to actually not only advance your own enlightenment, but also to spread some of the wisdom
Right.
on other people.
And to try and practice being the observer, wouldn't you say? Can you
Yeah.
talk a minute or two about what that means of being the observer?
Yeah, that's so important, Ora. The observer in Buddhism, and especially in Buddhist psychology, is called the cultivation of the witnessing awareness. And so that we have to have a part of the self that's in the moment and it's being fully alive. But mindfulness teaches us also almost, it's like, in an Irish way, it's like as if you had a little leprechaun on your shoulders that was saying, be mindful, be mindful. Oh, that's very unkind. No, don't react to that patient that way. Oh, no, don't say that. That will hurt that person's feelings.
But having that, let me ask you, someone said to me recently, boy, it takes a lot of work to be self-aware all the time. It's exhausting. I said, you're right, it is exhausting.
It's
But it's
exhausting.
the only way we can come to know ourselves.
Yeah, but I'm going to bring in the fun notion of it, though, the fun level. We have to shuttle from having a really damn hell of a good time here on planet Earth and the hard work.
Right.
And we can have both, because the Buddha didn't just teach about suffering. He also taught about happiness. And happiness includes joyfulness and resilience. So, like, you can do the practices and you can have a good time, a hell of a good
Right.
time.
Right. And to balance that, to strike that delicate balance,
The delicate
that
balance,
wonderful, sweet spot
the sweet spot.
that we all like to go to.
Yeah, and that's
And
what
know that it's there to go to return to. Again, what you said earlier, returning back home to self.
coming home to self and tasting the sweet nectar of the gods, of the wisdom mind, but also the sweet spot of happiness, joyfulness, blissfulness, having a good time. Because no one's up there saying it's just got to be, this time on planet Earth is just about suffering.
Right.
There is suffering. There's no
Yes,
escape
of
from that.
course.
But it's
of
also
course.
about happiness
Right.
and fulfillment and creativity.
Absolutely. Yes, it is. So we're almost down to the wire here now. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight to Sacred Sundays, and thank Dr. Ronald Alexander.
Thank you for having me,
And
Ora.
if you, my pleasure. If you don't have a copy of Ron's book, do you have your copy next to
Yeah.
you? Let's hold that up.
Called Wise Mind, Open
I
Mind.
highly recommend that you pick it up. You can purchase it here tonight, correct?
Where are they? Okay.
Great.
And thank you very, very much for coming out on Mother's Day.
Yes, yes. Thank you again. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left, Ben is telling me. So why don't we have an ending meditation, a short and sweet spot meditation. All right, let's go to that sweet place within and drop into that present awareness of that place in us, that inner knowing. Let's take a deep breath in and let it go. Another deep breath in and let it go. And allow yourself to be in this moment of now. Nowhere else but right here. Letting yourself find that way home to your most authentic, real place that is you. The you that you know is who you were when you came in to this incarnation. Who were you? Who was the self that decided to be here? Can you remember? Allow yourself to remember. And as Ron said earlier, to return home to that place. It is there, deep within. Feel the quiet of that place, the knowing of that place, and the acceptance of you in the beingness of that place that is home. I am here is the mantra. I am here now. Feel the lightness of your being, the unheaviness of the weight that we carry around sometimes that is not where home is. Home is light and free. Allow yourself to drop deeper into that place of remembering, of knowing. Do you remember it? It's in the now. It's right now. And all it takes is giving yourself the permission to go there. Come home to you. Come home. Remember this place within. It is always there. And when you're ready, bring your focus and awareness back to being in your body, in this room, and open your eyes. Thank you.